Arteta! What a strike! What a screamer! Zola! And a fantastic goal! Arsenal back in it! And here's Limpar, lines it up, finds the net. Arsenal in front.
The important thing with young players is not to get ahead of yourself, to give them room and time to grow, and not let the hype outweigh the reality. With that having been said, let's hope they're at least preparing to replace Henry's statue with Martinelli's. This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name is Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. That's right. You can call him Pele. You can call him Ronaldo Ellie or Martinaldo or Thierry Martinelli, whatever you want to. The fact is he's the greatest player in the history of the club, and I'm thrilled that we've got him. And quite a few greatest players in the history of the club potentially coming through the academy. Something that we will talk about on this podcast with Tim. You can find him on Twitter at Stilberto. Hello, Tim.
Hello there.
And allowed out of his stats cage for reasons that remain unclear to me, you have Scott. You can find him on Twitter, _that_crab. Hello, Scott.
Yeah!
Man, I missed that. So real quick, housekeeping. Our friends, the lingerie people, the Enclosed, they're coming back, so you'll be hearing from them this winter. We missed it. Nothing says cold weather like a lacy thong or something like that, so looking forward to that. But you know what's also kind of lacy and sexy? Some of the writing that's been going on at The Athletic, and you should definitely sign up there. There's a really, really good article, actually, that was just posted about how players are sort of warmed down after a match and what they go through to stay fit. Really interesting. Thought that was cool. Not sure if anybody caught that, but one that I tweeted out on my timeline if you want to check it out. And you can go to it at theathletic.com/Arsenal Vision and get it half off and a month free and help us. We've got some really good guests for the international break. Can't wait for that. So we'll get to the match. Oh, by the way, over on Patreon, we did our Manchester United second half rewatch. We are going to probably do a match spotlight on Martinelli, maybe, because he just about deserves it. And we get a couple other cool ideas queued up there. So anyway, love you all. So happy to have you here, and we can dive in. And Tim, I have to say, I'm enjoying the cup football more than the league football at the moment. You know, all the things about it, the young players coming through and exciting us, the attacking front-footed football, aided no doubt by the not particularly fantastic opposition, it must be said. The goals, the shots, the whole thing, it's all looking really nice. I think we should just start with Martinelli, though. Seeing as how you are an adopted Brazilian, he is a player that we spoke about when we signed him. You thought maybe it was a little too soon to expect much from him, and I'm curious to get your take on how you evaluate the player now and how impressed you are by him versus maybe your expectations when he came in.
Yeah, really impressed. And I think even beside the goals, because, you know, obviously if you scored like 4 goals in 2 games, that's going to grab attention. But I really, really very honestly think even if he hadn't scored those goals, that he'd get a lot of deserved commendation for his performances. And he's got this really nice kind of way of pressing as well from the front, where he kind of lulls you into a full sense of security, because he doesn't go up and at him straight away. He kind of he lays back and he just lets the defender relax, and then he goes for him. And it's kind of a technique I think Sanchez had, that I think Luis Suarez has as well. You know, maybe it's a South American thing, I don't know. But just that kind of lying in wait, and then just as the defender controls the ball and starts looking up and thinks they're comfortable, he goes after them. And you know, his work rate off the ball has been really good. I think we spoke after the kind of Nottingham Forest pod about some of the positions he takes up, and, you know, the fact that he's played all across the front line in his youth. And I think Clive made the fairly interesting comparison to Son, and I think there is a bit of that. Like I said last time, he doesn't just stand on the penalty spot; he does take up those half spaces very well. And yeah, I've been super impressed with the way he's played, and perhaps, you know, that's just the value of him playing a bit of, you know, playing men's football, playing kind of lower league Brazilian football, rather than, you know, coming to Europe when he was 15, which he had the opportunity to do, and playing on manicured pitches in the academy and playing academy football. Because I think sometimes when you come through the academy system and you start playing first team football, there's a fair bit of probably deprogramming that needs to go on to get people attuned to it. And I don't think he's really had to do that. He's come from you know, the Brazilian 4th division. And it's interesting because towards the end of Wenger's reign, you know, after what Leicester did Wenger and Gazidis started talking about how actually it's sometimes better to take players from the lower leagues because they already have that kind of that hunger. They haven't, they kind of didn't have privilege, as it were, in a footballing sense. They've played on bad pitches and they've had to earn it, and they've had to kind of run after lost causes, etc., etc. So I think there's some really interesting qualities there, and I don't really think he's ever played as a centre forward. I may be wrong about that, but I really don't think it's a position he's played very often. But he looks like a natural.
Yeah, Unai said it's not his best position. That he is more of a wide player, but certainly he does look like a natural there. Tim, I think one of the things we tend to do whenever players start to come through is we try to find comparable players to them.
Yeah, which is natural.
And it is natural. And it may be a weird comparison, but there's a little bit of either Aguero. I mean, is that in the sense of like, he's not the most physically imposing, but he uses his body well. He has a surprising quickness and an ability to just annoy the shit out of you in and around the box. He gets into good spaces.
Yeah.
He elevates at the right times. He knows when to make the near post run or when to drop in. You could also say that Aubameyang has a little bit of that, although the body type is different. Is that a comparison that fits for you? Do you have another one you like?
I think so, yeah. And I think it's quite interesting that quite a lot of the players we're kind of talking about aren't European. So there definitely is something of the South American forward about him. I think, there's a bit of Aguero. Gabriel Jesus is very similar. He's not big or physically imposing, but he's good at getting in positions. Sanchez, I think, Roberto Firmino, there's a bit of all of that there. And, Clive compared him to Son as well. Not South American, but not European either. I don't know if there's anything in that. It could all just be a coincidence. We could unconsciously just be looking for that because he happens to be South American. But he's, I guess I'd probably call him like a pockets player. He's just good at picking up those spaces wherever they are. And that's what I mean about him kind of leaning towards the half spaces. He's never he's rarely in like a really central position. Even that header he scores, he doesn't go and run from the penalty spot for that. He is already in that half space, even when he's anticipating a cross. That seems to me to be where he likes to linger. And that's really interesting. Yeah.
I mean, it is. The neat thing about it is he seems really comfortable off the ball, operating in space in the center of the box, but he definitely has a trick on the ball and an ability to beat a man with the ball at his feet. So, if he has to play out wide, that would be just as comfortable for him. We see with Aubameyang, maybe the challenge is he's not quite so good with the ball. I mean, it's not that he's bad with it. It's just not where he's elite. Whereas Martinelli, you can see him maybe having a little bit more comfort with the ball at his feet. Scott, I'd love to just sort of pick some of the statistical details out of the game from him and maybe generally, I mean, when you look at the game he had statistically, I think it's just as impressive as the sort of subjective viewpoint of the game. Do you have any statistics that kind of emphasize the quality he brought to this fixture?
Yeah, I mean, I thought this was probably one of the best all-around performances we've seen from an Arsenal forward this season. He had great shot volume, created for teammates. He had almost 1.6 XG, or, he did have 1.6 XG all by himself, which is quite phenomenal. It was actually funny. He actually missed a lot of the bigger chances and scored the harder ones. So it was very well that he could have done, at least 3 goals, 4 goals wouldn't have been out of the question for the chances that he was able to get. He had 4 key passes, including 2 big chances. That one that he got to the byline and just chipped it up that Ceballos scored. That was a great piece of skill right there because that ball was floated perfectly, perfectly weighted and, got over everybody just for Ceballos to score. And you did seem to be active on defense, 3 tackles, was only dispossessed 1 time. You draw fouls. So, I mean, I think it was overall basically everything you'd expect for in an all-around performance statistically. Yeah,
and I mean, it's one of those rare games where you got to see him be a phenomenal striker in the game and also provide some phenomenal wing play in the game. Before we turn it over to our surprise guest, do you want to just really quickly hit us with some of the general stats from the game, the XG overall, the shots? I mean, I'm guessing, and again, we'll run this through the Crapaton 4000 in a bit, but I'm guessing statistically overall, this winds up looking like one of our best performances of the season as a team.
Yeah, so I mean, the overall, this one is 4.2 to 0.6, so it almost perfectly matches up with the 4-0 scoreline. But also, it is kind of interesting. So Arsenal go out to a 3-0 lead on less than 1 XG, and then spend the rest of the game missing big chances just to even things up. But overall, this was definitely one of the better performances. The thing that I actually probably really liked the most was that even after going up 3-0, Arsenal still continued to hold on to the ball. They were always in control. They didn't seem to go into their passive thing that we've seen so often this season, and continued to look for more goals, and never really gave Standard Liège the chance to get back into this one.
Yeah. Well, we got a legal letter from Poznan and My Pants Industries saying that if we invoked the Crapaton 4000 without having him on the pod, we would face a lawsuit. So we've invited him on the pod. Paul's on Twitter at Poznan My Pants. Hello, Paz.
Woohoo!
Run it through the Crapaton 4000 for us. Where does this rate?
It was a 6.1, factoring in the opposition, the players on the pitch, and the competition. So,
okay.
I do want to have one objection here. We keep saying that the team level, but I mean, if you actually look at the ELO ratings, they're pretty comparable to a bottom table Premier League team, and we don't do this against the bottom table Premier League teams this season.
Yeah, I think the pushback from that, and we'll come to that because I think that's a debate that we should have. But I think the pushback, if there was going to be one, would be: did they show us more deference than the bottom of the table Premier League teams do in terms of coming at us? And we'll come on to that. Paul, I went with Martinaldo, I think, as the new name of this bright young superstar. You have a comp player for him?
Yeah, Bobby Martinelli, I think, would be the way I go. Look, this was a shot monster performance with 7 shots, but it was also a performance monster. I mean, even if you took away his goals, he had a great game. Even if you took away his goals and the assists, he's like a Tasmanian devil for the whole 90 minutes. He just runs and runs. I think we all saw that moment where he was like chasing down across their front three. We'd already won the game at this stage. We were probably 4 up at this point. He's chasing across their back line as the ball goes around, and the ball gets played down the wing into our final third, and he tracks it all the way into the penalty box in, like, I don't know what it was, but maybe the 80th minute of the game, and the guy just goes and goes. I mean, he's an absolute phenomenon, and I don't think he's going to have quiet games for us. We'll talk about other comparisons to youth players, but they can kind of be a bit invisible after having a good game. Martinelli is not one of those guys who's not going to be visible in a game. The impression he leaves on the pitch is just phenomenal, and I really think he provides. I really think an interesting comparison is Nketiah, who's over at Leeds, and Bielsa. I've watched every moment of Nketiah so far, and as everybody knows, I love that guy. I think he's a brilliant talent, but Bielsa isn't convinced that's the guy to put the personality on the pitch up front in each game, and he's playing this Bamford character. And you don't have that issue with Martinelli. Now, maybe Martinelli will turn out not to quite be a striker, where Nketiah is obviously a guy who goes into the 6-yard box. Unai is entitled to his opinion. It's a game of opinions, this football. I think he definitely has what it takes as a striker, but time will tell. And like if Martinelli were over at Leeds, he might be the guy who pushes Bamford out of the way because he can do it all. Eddie can score 2 goals in a game or 1 goal in a game, but outside of that, he's kind of ghosting around. He's subtle. There are different kinds of strikers, and I hope in a year or two we'll have the challenge of having 2 prodigious talents and saying, well, which kind of striker do we want? Yeah,
I mean, look, it's easy to get carried away with these kind of performances, and so we should. And I think that's what we're going to do. Tim, I want to shift gears a little bit to another 2 players on the pitch that we'll get to some of the other young players, because I think Joe Willock certainly deserves attention. I think Nelson deserves attention. But I want to talk about Ceballos and Torreira, because I think they both look more comfortable. And just by the way, to put things in perspective, we think, Standard were terrible. They didn't come at us. They didn't try to play. Can you evaluate the game? Just for a little perspective, Standard played more passes in the first half than we did in the first half at United. They had more shots in the first half than we had in the first half of United. They played more passes in the game than we played in the game against United. So
they had many fine crosses in the first half.
They had no big chances. They had 13 shots, which actually isn't awful. But I mean, look, they were blown off the pitch. I think all I'm saying is, we really dominated this game, and still, we had 556 completed passes in this game. We dominated the possession. We dominated the territory. And I think two players that looked really comfortable, admittedly under lower pressure, were Ceballos and Torreira. And so I want to get your thoughts on the way they were used in this game as it contrasts with the way they've been used in Premier League games, and if there's something that can be taken from that in terms of how they should be used going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think what you saw as well, not just controlling the ball better, but we controlled space better. Standard Liège, they weren't parking the bus. This wasn't, maybe they should have, really. This wasn't a backs to the wall, park the bus type performance. Though they like, as you illustrated, they were coming at us, not very well, but they were doing it. But Arsenal, you didn't get that sense that we were just wide open all the time, because the space was just so much more controlled. And so on one hand, I get slightly annoyed at the moment about the amount of which individuals are being dug out. And I get a bit annoyed about this kind of, Luiz and Socrates are shit. And they're not. They're just playing in a completely different kind of setup that doesn't help them, quite frankly. But having said that, and I don't want to dig him out because I think the manager is exposing him, isn't it weird how all of our best performances are without Granit Xhaka? And that's not because Granit Xhaka is terrible or awful or an awful person or an awful footballer. It's because, in part, we're asking him to do a job, I think, that he can't really do. We're basing a counter-attacking transition game around him, which I can't quite work out why we're doing that. When we have a really kind of, in Torreira, we have a really like counter-attacking transition type player, but it looked so much more cohesive again, a bit like against Burnley, who are a much stiffer challenge than Standard Liège were, who came at us much better and I think are a better team than Standard Liège. But you just had that little sense of cohesion again, and you just had that sense that there were defined roles in this midfield three. So Torreira was doing his stuff in front of the back four, and look, to be fair, Torreira gave the ball away a couple of times, and it did make me think, maybe that's like, if I'm Unai Emery, maybe I'm looking at that and going, Xhaka wouldn't have done that.
He's done it a bit this season, hasn't he?
Yeah, precisely. But not all the time, and I still think, basically, I think that Xhaka doesn't there are lots of our midfielders are flawed for that particular position, but I don't think Xhaka solves any of the problems. Like Guendouzi, for example, playing deepest, I think works in a lot of ways. You could say defensively he's not always that switched on and he's quite reactive rather than proactive, but that's not a problem Granit Xhaka solves in particular. And so, I just felt the spacing was much better and the roles were just much clearer in that midfield three. It's much cleaner. It's Torreira, I'll do the cleaning in front of the back four and I'll take the ball off the centre half. Ceballos kind of, drifting over to the left-hand side and cutting in. He's the creator. Willock, I'm the one that's going to move my arse off the ball. And, as and when needed, I can carry the ball as well. It was just a much nicer spread of attributes. And you talk about some of these players, you think, you've earned a shot. Like, it's really interesting what he's going to do on Saturday. It's a wonderful problem he's got on Sunday, rather. He's got to pick between two 18-year-olds for the left wing spot, both of whom totally deserve to start in Saka and Martinelli. And it's wonderful that like these young players, like what I'm not getting the sense of watching these young players is, in recent seasons where we've played them either in the Europa League or the League Cup under Arsene Wenger, and you still had this sense that there were two Arsenal teams. There was like the cup team and the first team, and this feels much more fluid. This feels like, these guys will play considerable first team minutes. This isn't Carlos Vela scoring a hat-trick against Wigan and then not playing again until the next round. This is you could start on Sunday, And so, if some of these young players have earned more of a chance, then players like Torreira and Ceballos have earned that as well. When you're looking at picking the team on Sunday, you've got to say, okay, Standard Liège not the strongest opposition, but but you've just got to go on what you've seen, and it's like, what has been our best functioning midfield this season? Well, that one, therefore, you've earned another chance. Like, you earn a promotion, right? It's like being a manager. If you're a really good mid-table manager, what happens? You take a job higher up, and you might not be able to do it, but you earn the shot, is what you do. And that's kind of what I think's happened here. Those guys, yep, they could play against Bournemouth on Sunday, and it might not work. And it might be a completely different game. It might be more intense, and therefore their effectiveness might be reduced. But basically, I think they've earned the right to fail.
Yeah, I think that's right. Paul, I know you had a question for Tim just about the change that was made later in the game.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any significance in it, but when he brought on Guendouzi, it seemed Torreira was shifted from the DM spot where I was enjoying. I was kind of hoping Unai saw this as, well, let's give Torreira a run at DM and see how this pans out for the team. But he brings on Guendouzi and shifts Torreira back to his, Yeah,
100%. And I sit directly opposite the bench, so I can often see what the managers are gesticulating when they make these changes. And yet 100%, he said straight away to Guendouzi, he was like motioning his arms backwards, and as soon as Guendouzi came on, he spoke to Torreira. So yeah, that is kind of exactly what happened, and he put Guendouzi in that deeper role, and that's to briefly reignite a discussion of previous pods. That's why I think he's got Guendouzi earmarked to take that Xhaka role more than I think he's got Torreira earmarked for it.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of these things I think that you have to look at, and while no one would say that Frankfurt or Forest or Burnley or Standard Liège are the best competition, a lot of players have looked more comfortable in the roles they've been given. We played 4-2-3-1 a lot more. Ceballos needs that partner. I mean, if you look at this game, Torreira and Ceballos completed a lot of passes. You know who their most common passing recipient was? Each other. They thrive off that. Small space, partner next to him, give it and move it up the pitch by connecting with your midfield partner, and they understand those roles. And I think when you look at Torreira completing 2 passes against United in that more advanced role, and you look at how this worked with Willock kind of gliding all over the pitch in that sort of number 10 role, it just looked a lot more comfortable for everybody. And I think sometimes tactics can take a back seat to just putting players in more natural positions. And we can go forward and talk about that more. But Scott, I think we have to get to some of the other performances that are really exciting about this. And let's face it, one of the things that maybe makes this whole lineup work is the presence of 2 excellent fullbacks. By the way, Scott is our reporter on the side of the freeway right now. So do you want to? What's the traffic like at present?
It's going pretty good right now. We're moving good. It's 11 o'clock, so
good.
There's
Great.
No rush hour or anything.
Thanks for that.
He's in a helicopter over London Colney.
Yeah. Getting with a banner. We won't tell you what the banner says. So, I mean, I think Bellerin looked maybe a step off the pace. Great to see him back. Loved him standing up for his teammate when the fracas broke out briefly. But I think the bigger performance here was Tierney. Kolasinac has been, I mean, let's say it, he hasn't been very good. It is what it is. I don't think that's a controversial opinion. And Tierney, admittedly with a step down in competition, just looked fantastic. Better crosses, covering the pitch more easily, just effortless running. The athleticism that he's renowned for was on display. How impressive was Tierney's performance for you, and how important is the return of one or both of these fullbacks for the way we want to build play?
I think that was the biggest thing, is that, you had a fullback on both sides of the pitch that were comfortable on the ball. We could see just the speed in the way that we built up just seemed to be a lot faster. That we would see the one touch kind of thing where you'd get the little triangle, we'd pass it a couple times, maybe we'd go back to go forward, but it didn't ever feel like it was something that was struggled with. It felt a lot more natural, that these guys felt comfortable on the ball. It didn't matter if there was a defender there with them. So I thought that just having both of, really highly technical, good on the ball players made a huge difference. Tierney was especially good for me, especially after we've gotten so used to, 75, 80% passing from our left fullback. getting him. I think he was at like 96% or something like that. It was just an absolutely, great passing. I thought his crossing was especially good. He wasn't, those, get down to the byline and do a pullback. It was a lot. He was crossing from a little bit further out than you'd normally see with Kolasinac. But even then, it was still low, hard crosses that were causing problems. Overall, I thought he was a very good performance, and I am doing my best to not get over involved or overexcited about this one. But I can't wait for him to be a regular member of this team and hopefully really help up the technical ability in this team.
Does it? I don't know about you, but as I was watching around the 60-minute mark, I was kind of hoping he'd be subbed off with an eye towards him maybe being able to play at the weekend. Doesn't look like that happens. Are you slightly disappointed that we're probably not going to get to see him as soon as this weekend and have to wait till after the international break?
Was there something that was said that he's probably not going to play this weekend?
We played 90. I don't
know. I mean, it's, Sunday, Thursday. It's not that big of a thing. It's not like he had a ton of minutes.
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. He's not going to come back from injury and play Sunday, Thursday after 90 minutes. But I will take that as your sign that, yes, you are still holding out hope that he starts against Bournemouth.
Yes, I was fully expecting, hopefully, that he would be the main guy there on Sunday.
Yeah, I don't see it. Paul, over on the other side, I don't want to get dragged down into too much negativity because I think this was just a tremendously fun game with a lot of positive storylines. The Maitland-Niles one, maybe not the most positive. I don't think he had a mare or anything, but here's a guy who made a lot of noise in interviews that he's not a fullback and he's going to get to play his natural position. When I saw the lineup come out, I wasn't really clocking what the lineup was initially and thought, oh, good, we're going to see him in central midfield where his athleticism can really help us. It's something we've missed, his strength, his power. But of course, he was playing right wing, which I should have spotted. And it's a position that he likes himself in. I'm not sure he totally stepped up to the challenge. Do you think this was maybe a missed opportunity for him?
It was definitely a missed opportunity for him. And I think if you go back through it, you'll see moments where he does well. But overall, he didn't impress himself in the game. Now, obviously, there's extenuating circumstances in that he was on the Bellerin side, and Bellerin is clearly not physically where Tierney is. I mean, Tierney was on a rampage. But more than that, that's Ceballos' side on the left too. So then you got those two guys, and you got Nelson, who developed a really good understanding with Tierney and with Ceballos. But Tierney in particular, and those two were finding each other all the time, weaving patterns in that corner. And they were having so much success. I mean, the first 3 goals, Martinelli and
don't do it. Come on.
Willock were the first 2 goals, and Ceballos was the fourth. The first 3 goals. So it was all coming from that side. There was really no reason to switch it to the other side apart from perverse curiosity. And so I think he was a little bit left in the cold. And he was superb on the Martinelli assist, actually. It's Ceballos kicks that off. But Maitland-Niles is the guy who puts the ball through. Clever flick, just like Ceballos' was to get it started. So he does a couple of things, but mostly, he must go away from this game feeling he didn't really get a chance to show what he could do. And he clearly shows he's got skills and abilities, but whether he can really map his brain into the kind of group think of how the team is playing and go with the ebb and flow. Now, I don't know that he asked to be a right winger. I think he has some good skills for that. I always thought he had good skills for being a full back. I just think he should have poured himself into it. But what he probably wants to be is a right midfielder, which is a little different.
And let's be honest, I don't care how optimistic you are. I don't care how prone to positivity you are. You could be as prone to positivity as I am, which most people would say is excessive. But in that case, you're not going to have 7 academy players come through and be superstars. Right? Alex Iwobi is a successful academy player. And at best, he reached useful squad player and, had stretches of starting. So between Nelson and Willock and Maitland-Niles and Xhaka, they're not all going to be stars. They're just not, right? Maybe Xhaka and Willock make it and Nelson becomes a squad player and Maitland-Niles doesn't make it at Arsenal. You have to prime yourself for that being the outcome because ultimately the odds that all of them wind up making it, really making it, are very, very limited. And we've had that discussion before. And Tim, I think Torreira and Ceballos are an example of players that really just needed a good, solid performance that they dominated a game. They got it. Maitland-Niles didn't. Two players that I think are in interesting situations are Willock and Nelson. Willock, obviously, extremely impressive in this game. He has had what you'd consider a more traditional academy player's experience stepping up to the first team this season. He's had some performances where he did not look super comfortable. I mean, when he played 10 at Newcastle, he didn't totally look like he knew where to be. He clearly knew what he was doing in this game. I think Nelson a little bit too. Nelson stepped up and played some first team minutes. I think the Watford game, for example, nightmare, didn't go well. Other performances like this one that did go well. So for you with Willock and Nelson, the way they performed, I mean, maybe pairing them together isn't fair because I think Willock was a little more of a standout in this game than Nelson. But do you want to just sort of walk me through where you think they stand right now in the performance they put forward in this game?
Yeah, I thought they were both really impressive for different reasons. I've had my doubts about Nelson before, but I've actually liked him a little bit more this season than a lot of people have. I thought he was decent actually when he came on against Watford. In that, I think he did what he was told to do, which was to try and carry the ball on counter attacks, and Willock too, and actually possibly the role I see them both settling into this season is that kind of, I think Emery's going to like using them as substitutes, almost a bit like he kind of did with Iwobi and Mkhitaryan for a while. He either liked playing them for 45 minutes and taking them off or bringing them on for the second half. I can see him doing something similar with Willock and Nelson. I think I can see them kind of, starting plenty of games just because of the makeup of the squad. But I think because they're both decent ball carriers, he might see them as good substitutes. And, we saw the impact that Willock had along with Torreira as a substitute against Aston Villa recently. Just having that kind of hard running off the ball and on the ball type, pretty good to bring in for the last 20 minutes or so. I think there was a time where Ramsey was like that, where Ramsey's energy levels were such that he was a much more valuable player in the final 20 minutes when everyone was tired. But they'll both play plenty. I was really impressed with Nelson in this game actually, and I think the interesting thing for Nelson is that he strikes me as a bit of an Emery player. Maybe I felt this a little bit about Mkhitaryan last season, where I thought, well, maybe he is in and of himself not absolutely amazing or world class, but he kind of does the role that Unai Emery envisages for that wide player, in that he's quite happy to step inside as Emery likes and kind of create that box that he likes in midfield. He's quite happy combining with a fullback. He's happy to go outside. Inside, he's happy to take a fullback on and get across it, and he's happy to come inside and have a shot. And he had a few early in this game as well where he kind of just stepped inside and got that shot off to the far corner, which was something, Iwobi used to pick up that position quite a lot, but he just didn't have the shot on him, whereas I think Nelson does. And I do think we'll see that, 2 or 3 times this season. I fancy he'll score from outside the box. So I think this could be an interesting season for Nelson. I've got a feeling that the manager will take a shine to both of these players because they can do like a rough approximation of what he wants. And, they're both like quite hard working as well. I think they can do that kind of hard pressing. They can do the ball carrying, particularly if Emery does want us to be more effective in transition and on counters and therefore bringing them on at, perhaps in the last half an hour of a game really has some value. So I think that would represent success for both of them this season. And then next season, they might look at things like when Ceballos has probably gone, Willock might say, right, that's one more midfielder removed. If Emery keeps using Torreira this way, I think he'll go. In the summer, I already think that Xhaka, in a way, his time at Arsenal might, like, his usefulness might be expiring even in Emery's eyes. So I think there's plenty up for grabs for both of them. But also the interesting thing for Nelson, I said earlier, like, isn't it wonderful? We've got 2 18-year-olds really pushing hard for a spot on Sunday. And that means Nelson's got to raise his game, because he'd have come into this season and probably seen himself not miles ahead, but a bit ahead of Saka and Martinelli, who are a bit more green, have far less experience. But Nelson's now looking at this and thinking, "Oh Christ! Like these two 18-year-olds are actually pushing me as well," and that provides an interesting challenge for him. But I think they'll probably settle into the kind of the super sub role, and then next season see where they are.
Yeah, I mean, I said this in a conversation on Discord. Like, I like Nelson, and I think he's been fine. And fine is not bad. For an academy player to look fine in the first team is literally fine. I think Saka and Martinelli have flashed the kind of precocious talent that stands out. In the way any of these sort of superstar younger players around Europe stand out and make you sit up and take notice. Go ahead.
And actually, when you've got wide players as well, it usually pays to have one who's got that good again, a bit like Mkhitaryan, who's just got that good structural sense of where to be, where to stand, who can follow instruction, and then the guy on the other flank can be the slightly more mercurial one who can throw the step overs and perhaps score a couple of goals. But you want that one kind of, a bit like your fullbacks. Sometimes you want your Bakary Sagna on one side who will just stand where he needs to fucking stand, and do what he's told, and then the other one can be the kind of flying up and down with reckless abandon type.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think this is going to be a painful reference, but I remember when Gnabry first came into the team, immediately you're like, whoa, what's that? That looks good. And then injury hit and the loans went bad, and we all know where it landed. But there's something about a young player who's got end product that really jumps out at you. And I think a really good comp is Sterling. When young players have end product, they almost always turn out to be superstars. The thing that young players tend not to have is end product. And you always talked about this with Iwobi, Tim, is, we need to see, because the end product comes later, and it didn't really happen for him. When young players have end product, that is a tremendous sign that they are going to be really good. And Scott, I think you make a good point in the chat here that no one else can read, so I'll reference it. It's a question of ceiling, right? Like, Nelson could be a very good, solid player who provides something the team needs. The question is his ceiling maybe not as high as Saka or Martinelli, for example, who look like, based on the early returns, could deliver something that is much more akin to a superstar.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, too, that you can kind of see is that I think Nelson might be a more well-rounded kind of player. He may not have the same peak at one particular skill. He doesn't get as many shots. He doesn't seem to quite have an eye for the key pass like Martinelli. He doesn't have the world-class athleticism and that, explosive first step to be able to get by a player like Saka has. So I think there's like those kinds of things. So it's like, if you really kind of imagine maximizing those skills for those players, you have a very, very good talent. But if you kind of project Nelson, it's a above average player, which is still a great thing. I think that was always kind of the thing for Iwobi. Iwobi didn't necessarily have one particular thing that he was absolutely world class at, but he had a lot of things that he was very good at, and he became a very good player. And I think he is still a good player, but I don't know if you can ever look at him and say he's going to be a star. And that's kind of the thing that is always the most exciting with prospects, is you see, oh, this guy has the ability to become a star. And guys that can just become very good just don't have that same kind of wish casting that you can do on them.
Sometimes I think players confuse us too about who they are and what they can be. When we hear about a young wide player coming through who's got a very big talent, we envision a guy who scores tons of goals and dribbles and beats people and runs really fast, and like not all of them do that. A similar problem I'm having, Scott, is with Willock. And Joe Willock, to me, I just think, for whatever reason, central midfielder who can carry the ball and run between the lines and progress the play with the ball at his feet. And I don't know if that's who he is. He gets really good around the box. He has an instinct for a finish, I think. I think he can score goals. I think he might be more Ramsey than Guendouzi. In that he just seems to get better and better and better the closer he gets to goal. I'm not sure he's necessarily figured out positionally what to do off the ball just yet, and I'm not sure he has the athleticism and the defensive intensity to be a central midfielder. So are you at all confused by Willock? I mean, he played really well in this game. He's had moments where he's played brilliantly this season. Tim, I think it was you, Tim, that referenced Diaby. And I'm not sure if that was about Willock. Was that about Willock when we had that conversation?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it's brilliant. There's clearly something special in there, but figuring out how to deploy it as a trick. Do you have a sense of how you see that working best for him, Scott?
I think the other thing, too, that why we've kind of seen some of these disjointed performances from him is that how he's being asked to play has changed quite a bit. And I think this one where he was given more of the off-ball freedom to look for space to pop up and, do that Ramsey kind of thing, be the guy that, makes those runs from deep to get on the end of things. I think that really does maximize his skills. He's not like horrible on the ball, but I don't think that's going to be, his strength. And, we had Ceballos there on the other side. He wasn't asked to be the defensive guy. We had Torreira behind him. So it really let him lean into the things that he is really good at, while still, being a solid midfielder, being able to do some of the things. But that wasn't his main task to be able to do. And I think that's some of the things that I think really just looking at this midfield performance, overall, everybody was, kind of in a role that they were comfortable in. Danny Ceballos wasn't asked to be the 10. He got to be more of a little bit deeper on that left-hand side that he's so comfortable in. He looked better. Torreira playing a little bit deeper, being the guy that, cleans up things, kind of starts things, keep it simple. He still had the ability to go forward some if he needed to, but I think he was given something that he was a little bit more comfortable with. So I think overall, just that midfield just felt better because the roles matched the players better.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Look, if you look at some of the younger players who have struggled at their time at Arsenal, whether you want to talk about an Oxlade-Chamberlain or even an Ainsley Maitland-Niles, they're players who never got to, for any extended period, just go play where they're most comfortable. Arsene Wenger famously said, I see Ox as a player who will eventually play through the middle. Guess how often he played through the middle for Arsenal? Never. Maitland-Niles, maybe a central midfielder. He played there once against Southampton in the FA Cup. And look great. Whereas you look at Saka and Martinelli, who are shining right now, they've been told, hey, go play left wing, go play center forward, go have fun in positions that are natural to you. Whereas you look at Nelson, who played right wing back at a certain period, I think in Arsenal's last season, was it? And Maitland-Niles playing right back. And so, yeah, the players that get to play in positions that are more clearly defined for them when they're young probably have a better chance to develop. There's something to that. I mean, what about you, Paul? I think Willock is showing that there is an elite talent there, if not necessarily showing exactly how to use it.
Yeah, though I think I think we're harsh when we kind of question the start of the season. I know nobody's beaten up on him, but the Newcastle game's an outlier, right? We're all aware that what they did, the one area he was standing was the one area they had like 9 men on the pitch. It was specifically their objective to block the middle of the pitch. Did they have 3 at the back? They had a packed midfield, and that was basically it. They decided to stop us coming through the middle, and we wondered why Willock, in his first game ever for Arsenal as a 10, didn't have a great performance when we expected so much. I mean, I don't know who was going to have a good performance in that one. And then you look at the United game, and we bring him on as a left winger, as a sub, and I actually think if you throw away a couple of it, and I thought he was okay, but he didn't have much of a role there. I think he's been great. I think I do have a concern with him, but it's the concern you would have with an 18-year-old who's played various positions in and around midfield, which is defensively he can lose track of where we're at and lose track of game management. And my biggest concern with him was actually the Anfield game. When you look at the goal they got in the second half, it's TAA passes it into Firmino, who flicks it onto Salah, who gets fouled for the penalty. And it's Henderson who makes the diagonal run out to the corner, and Willock kind of goes with him and kind of does nothing. But he runs right past that passing lane he's supposed to block with the TAA, which he does all through the first half. And I think that's where my concerns are with Willock more. As an 18-year-old, he's not secure enough when we're out of possession. I think he does everything else you'd want him to do great. I actually think he's got a pretty good pass on him. I think he's maybe Pogba light. I think the Diaby comparison is good, but I wouldn't be telling Tim that was brilliant. I'd say it was good. I think Pogba's also
Okay, my bad.
a good. I just thought that was excessive. I think it's a good comparison. I think
That's you told, Tim.
Yeah, he doesn't have Pogba's top end vision, but he's had times where he's laid off some excellent passes. And the other thing he has is it's the same way Ozil has it. He has these swivel hips. There was a game right at the early in the season where he gets to the byline and his hips swivel 180 degrees and he passes straight backwards, setting up. I don't know what turned out. I think it turned into a goal, but it was a brilliant cutback. And he can do that. He can swivel and lay a ball back at speed like nobody I've seen in our team, apart from maybe Ozil. He's got a lot of skills that I would want to see him diabying up and down that pitch from, kind of the second pivot role, not our deepest lying playmaker, but all day, every day, I'd develop him as that second pivot or that central midfielder. And yes, he can do the Ramsey. He's not afraid of the 6-yard box. I just think he's got a superb career ahead of him as a great central midfielder. Gerrard, Lampard, all of these guys ran straight up and down the pitch, and I think he can do that.
Yeah, I think you're right to focus on his hips, because the one thing we do know is that they don't lie. So you can get a really honest assessment of a player by watching, because hips don't lie. Look, with respect to how you're phrasing, it's interesting because we have a lot of interesting people in the Discord for Patreon who have a lot of interesting contributions to make and help me see things in a maybe slightly different way. And I know that Jane Cavendish, who's in the Discord, we've talked about Willock a bit, and I think she's skeptical of his top level athleticism and defensive intensity. And I definitely think that's something that can be worked on. I do see him being one of these players that has a more natural instinct closer to goal than maybe he does deeper in midfield. I'll tell you what we're going to do.
A lack of athleticism, though, I'm not sure I get that bit.
Maybe off the ball intensity. And I mean, athleticism in the sort of pure, the sprints. I don't know, he's good at carrying the ball. He's got power and strength in the way he carries the ball. I don't know if he has that sprinting speed. I have to admit, I struggle with that sort of thing, because I think, what is real athleticism? Is it jumping? Is it physical power? Is it top end speed? Danny Welbeck was a supreme athlete, right? Or may still be, to be fair to him. He could run, he could jump, he could sprint, he could burst, he was strong. I guess everybody has a different feeling. Like Guendouzi is an athlete. I just think
Willock's kind of an optical illusion.
Yeah.
He's with the ball, I'm thinking, the guy's going to catch him, but he's actually pulling away.
Yeah, well, and Guendouzi's an athlete. Is it because he sprints? No, but he just has that aerobic ability to run for 90 minutes and keep his level high. I mean, there's all different ways. So, you know what I'm going to do? Let's make a deal. It's 47 minutes into the podcast. There's no need to take an advertising break at this point. We're having a great conversation. I want to break it up. So what I'll do, I'll take a beat. If 5 people sign up for our Patreon right now, we won't take an advertising break. Does that sound fair? Just 5.
Yeah.
It's just 5. All right, 5. So, well, there's 2. All right, there's 5. Thanks, guys. We really appreciate it. I want to thank Bob, Jim, Jane, Sarah, and Betty for that. Thank you for that. Okay, Tim, moving on. Yowzers. So one of the things that I think was interesting about this game is it was a chance for some players to sort of get right, for lack of a better way to put it. I'm not sure Pepe necessarily did that. And I think the way Martinelli and Xhaka are playing and the way some of the younger players are pushing, I think suggesting that Pepe has been bad is wrong. He has not been bad. And the data is interesting. If you just look at the data in terms of what he's doing from a dribbling standpoint and a ball progression standpoint and final third entry, and he's taking shots, the end product isn't really coming. But I'm curious to get your sense on how he looked in this game, if you think there is an argument for him maybe not necessarily being guaranteed a starting place, and where we go from here with Pepe, because we have a lot invested in him. I still believe in him. We need it to work. So we're incentivized to make it work. But how are you feeling about the way he looked in this game, and in general, what we should be thinking about doing with him going forward?
I thought he was really good when he came on. Well, to be honest, I can't.
Done and done.
well, the thing is, so first of all, there's something about game state here. Arsenal scored 3 times in 22 minutes. That makes it a different game to come into. That means the contest was dead for 40 minutes by the time he'd come on. That makes the game state completely different.
Yeah,
if Arsenal are really going for goals here, then I think things look different. I did think when he came on, I thought to myself, yeah, I can see why he's coming on. Emery wants him to join the party here, and he's probably thinking, no, there's probably goal in this for Pepe. But I think the game had just kind of petered out at that point. But I can't think of a thing he did wrong. I can't think of a time where he miscontrolled the ball or he made the wrong pass or he lost it. I just can't think of any of that. And so he was. I thought he looked a bit better in this game than perhaps, certainly than he did against United, than he had recently, which is probably a lot to do with the fact that I think all arrows point to the midfield here. That's why the defence is looking better and that's why the attack looks better, because playing a slightly more balanced midfield, and it makes a lot of difference. And I thought, there were some good early signs of him combining with Bellerin, which I think, could make a lot of difference for him.
Yeah, that I agree with. That's a really good point. I mean, with guys like Chambers is all well and good, but he's not naturally a fullback, and there's no real overlap and combination there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I sense that without Lacazette, he's been playing a bit closer to Aubameyang, so he's been, taking some more central positions and not, I get the sense that what he wants to do is collect the ball wide and then move into the half space with it, whereas he's kind of starting in the half space and getting crowded out. And that didn't happen as much this time. And again, some of that is just because Liège were done. I thought he was absolutely fine. I think the thing is, I think he needs to score a goal soon. I don't think so much for himself. Maybe, a bit for himself. I think for us, I think we're getting a bit antsy as a fan base about it, and the kind of the mumbling starting. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure he wants a goal and he needs a goal. I think we need him to score a goal more than he needs it, if you know what I mean, because it's starting to become a talking point. And I like you say, he hasn't been bad. I can't think of many misplaced passes, easy misplaced passes. I can't think, maybe there are a few at Old Trafford. I can't think of too many times where he's just thumping the ball out of play or anything. He's just been a bit average, really. And yes, it perhaps creates an issue for him that Xhaka and Martinelli have been really good, but albeit they've been playing in different teams with different structures, who've released the handbrake a bit more. I think the worst thing we could do now is drop him out. The absolute worst thing, because he's not even close to a liability. I think you play him on Sunday, but put players around him that can help get the best out of him. If that means playing Ozil, or if you still don't want to play Ozil because he's playing silly buggers in training, play Ceballos and, give him a framework around him that can help him. That I think that is more the way forward. And also, I don't think we want to expose some of these young players too much yet, because look, as Arsenal fans, we've been here before, right? We've been here before, and we've seen, like I said earlier, Vela score hat-tricks, Jay Simpson score hat-tricks, Bentner, Denilson, Song, rip Championship and lower-level Premier League teams apart in the League Cup, and we will go, play them in the first team, and guess what? We played them all in the first team.
Yeah, and it didn't necessarily go the way we would have liked. And I suspect that Tim may have just dropped off there, unless I dropped off. So we're about to find that out. Scott, you got to run soon, don't you?
I do.
Do you have time to quickly touch on one more topic?
I do.
So, just real quick, I mean, you look at the data. Does the data suggest that maybe we are all overstating Pepe's struggles? I mean, do the numbers like him better than maybe our eyes?
It seems like it's very much it's fine. And I think that when you kind of look at it in context, he doesn't have the partner on the right-hand side to really maximize him. He doesn't have another guy in the team that's really kind of taken on the creative burdens. I think that's kind of fallen on him. One of the things that, I think Tim was talking about, he hasn't really misplayed any easy stuff. It really looks like he's trying to do too many hard things, actually, almost like, you see him like when he gets the ball in the final third and he's trying to do something spectacular. It feels like he's trying to impress a little bit in that regard, trying to play, the absolute perfect ball when maybe that's not the, the best case to do. So, it could be, he's got the price tag and, that's a mental thing and he's got to deal with that. But you look at it, he's creating chances for teammates. He's getting shots for himself. He's dribbling. He's doing all the things that you kind of expected him to do. The one thing that just hasn't happened is goals yet. So I'm not ready to give up on him. I don't think he's been horrible. I think that, he's still providing value to the team, creating a threat out there. The other thing, too, is that, Arsenal have had a very heavy left-handed bias in this team, and I don't know if that's going to change necessarily with Tierney hopefully coming in soon. But I think, that kind of a thing too, that, he's not necessarily involved in the build-up. He's kind of isolated there on the right-hand side. So maybe when Bellerin is back and, firing, we'll be able to kind of balance out the way that we attack down the side. So I think that, looking at things, it's been fine. There's no major kind of like red flag saying that, this is a transfer that's ready to go bad or anything like that. So I think it's just time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that I find that very encouraging, and I like that perspective from both of you. I think if I had to pick on him, if I had to pick a thing that I think he's, the expression pressing too much. He's maybe just pressing a little too much. I don't mean pressing defensively. I mean pressing in the sense of just trying trying to make things happen too much. And
it feels like he's trying to squeeze balls through really tight windows that, aren't necessarily there to be open to play through. Yeah. And it's like one of those things, like if it comes off, it's like a highlight that, gets, retweeted 100 times. But if it doesn't, it's just, he did it again. And then, we lost the ball. Yep,
exactly. And the one thing I would wish he would do a little more is maybe just release the ball a little quicker. He trusts himself to beat a man, and he often can. I think he's holding the ball a little too long and some of the passing lanes are going. And maybe if he gave it sooner, he could then run into space and receive it back and trust his teammate to give it back to him. So, Scott, we'll let you go. Scott's on Twitter at _that_crab. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Cheers. Okay, Paul, let's get into the meat of the conversation regarding the style of play. I think this is maybe the most interesting debate to have coming out of this game. This has been very enjoyable, and the Forest game was very enjoyable. 26 shots, tons of possession, 550 passes. Look, Manchester United, Liverpool, Spurs, Chelsea, they're not going to let us do that. Fine, those are different games, and I put those to one side. But the Watfords, the Villas, those teams, am I convinced that they're worse than Liège? I'm not convinced. Again, Standard Liège had as many passes and shots in this game as we did against United, so it's not like they weren't in the game. Can you look at this approach and translate it to our Premier League approach? Can you put Aubameyang in and, Guendouzi if you need to, and maybe leave Xhaka? What would you like to see Emery take from this kind of performance and this kind of approach? Because look, if we're going to be critical of Emery, let's give him credit. He's the guy who put these players out there. He's the guy who told them how to go play, at least presumably. And it worked. And it worked really well, and it emphasized our strengths. And this team just looked at home pressing and pushing up and committing resources to the final third and playing around the edge of the opposition box. And we don't do it much in the Premier League. So can we have lessons from this game that get translated into our Premier League performances?
Sure. There's nothing about the way we played here that in an Arsene Wenger era you wouldn't say, oh yeah, that totally fits what we're doing in our Europa League and in our league performances. And maybe at the weekend you then field for a very similar approach with somewhat different players. And then maybe you say to yourself, well, maybe he's wedded to players that when he looks at playing this way, he says, well, it's just not a good fit. And the most obvious candidate is Xhaka. So we don't need to go through that whole debate again. But he probably does, if you're wedded to Xhaka for whatever his reasons are, he loves the deep ball progression and the leadership or whatever, maybe that's a player that makes him think what happened at Liège isn't going to happen against a Bournemouth or a Watford or whatever. So I think that's one aspect of it. But it makes you wonder then, even more so, why is he wedded to Xhaka? Xhaka's not the only guy who can play in that position, and he comes with a considerable. If we've talked about ceilings on players, he comes with this considerable floor of a ceiling in terms of what he can do in terms of mobility. But for whatever reasons, and I think we all think Xhaka's a really good player for 50% of what's required of a footballer, and on the other hand, he's highly immobile and has his brain fart moments and has his defensive awareness weaknesses, but he's wedded to the guy. So you got the Xhaka factor, and I do think although Liège are a team that could probably do okay in the bottom area of the Premier League, that still was not a game that had the intensity of Watford in the second half away from home, where it wasn't just that we were conservative. They overpowered us and we looked shagged. Again, there was no great reason for why we looked shagged out, but we kind of displayed we had no answer for it, weirdly.
I don't disagree, but I do sometimes wonder if being more conservative invites the kind of pressure over a sustained period that exposes our particular frailties. Like Liège did attack, but they couldn't sustain attacks and sustain possession in our defensive third because we did not allow that. When we got the ball, we pushed it into their defensive third and held it there for long stretches of time. And I think that does two things. I think it blunts their ability to commit resources the other way, and it sort of kills their will a little bit. And I do think when you sit back, let's face it, players like playing in the attacking third. They just do. It's more fun. It's it's easier. And so again, it's not that I'm disagreeing with you about the intensity, but I do think it is fair to question whether when you signal to the opposition the way you intend to play, does that have repercussions for how they're going to play against you?
Yeah, I think that's very fair, and I think Liège were good. They weren't much good in the second half when the battle was lost, but they could have easily have got the first two goals if they got their finishing right, or those crosses had been put away. I mean, they had 3-4 really good, dangerous situations of the ball fizzing through or past our 6-yard box or off somebody's head or whatever, and they didn't do what Martinelli did, and so it could have been a very different game. They were a good team. Certainly, it's a good comparison for, say, Bournemouth on Sunday at the Emirates. It's not necessarily going to be any tougher than that. It might be, but it might not be. But I think you're right. I think we'll go back to Emery's more measured approach. I don't really get it at this point. I do get he was waiting for his fullbacks. Well, waiting's the wrong word. I do see that the fullbacks can transform our capabilities as a team. Mm-hmm. But I don't know why you'd institute a way of playing that took you was 180 degrees from what would suit those guys. I know we are counter-attacking, but it's so contained, so passive in our approach, and defensively, where it just seems like bad management that the best excuse I can give him is waiting for Godot, waiting for the fullbacks to show up before he actually plays more progressive football, because it's just not pretty to watch. And the one thing I would have, I guess people sometimes frustrated with me that I'm somewhat patient with Emery, waiting for things to show up. The one thing that would have turned me on Emery by day 2 of this season was if he'd shafted the kids in terms of their development. If I just felt it was all words and he didn't follow through on that. So the one thing that gives me great heart after a Europa League game is, and I'm not saying he's the world's greatest development coach and he's all about the kids like Wenger was, but at least he's done nothing that makes me think he isn't giving these guys their shot. So I have a lot of tolerance for that. But yeah, I do not get his first team Premier League approach this season, and maybe it'll all make sense after we get the fullbacks up and running. I don't get it.
Can I just add on the fullbacks?
I would love it if you would, please. Yes,
because I'm thinking of writing a piece on this weekend. Actually, like how much will Bellerin and Tierney actually change? Because I know Andrew made a point a few times on the Arscast about this kind of we always seem to be waiting for something, and actually after a while you've just got to say that it's probably not going to change anything because everything else has already changed. But I'm cautiously do think that Bellerin and Tierney coming back to full fitness will change a few things. And I'll caveat this by saying Bellerin will not be up to full speed until New Year earliest. He might start playing more regularly.
I mean, I think you'd expect it at this point, but he's not he's not up to speed yet, that's for sure.
And like give it another month before he's playing every game, and even then it will take another couple of months before he's right back where he needs to be. But the thing that just gives me pause for thought, the amount of stock that Emery puts in fullbacks, it's huge. But B, I look at some of the problems in our team at the moment, and I think the centre halves. Why are the centre halves having such a hard time? They're being exposed. Why are they being exposed? Because Emery doesn't trust Maitland-Niles and Kolasinac, so he's splitting his central midfielders either side of Xhaka and playing them so wide and getting them into such wide places, and that's creating a problem for our midfield as well. So you think if he stops doing that, then, that kind of goes some way to allaying some of the problems our centre-backs and our centre midfielders are having. What's another kind of issue we've got at the moment? Pepe. How much does Bellerin potentially solve that issue for him? And so we've got some of these micro issues in the team, and it could be me wish casting. I'm fully prepared to believe that could be the case, but I do see them as a bit of a network. I do see it as a little bit of a kind of, it's like a rolling stone. And that perhaps the two fullbacks coming back just stops that kind of that domino effect.
I don't. So here's the thing, right? This was a fun game, and you should be able to hold your hand up and say, I enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun. And if you have enough conviction in your beliefs, one game shouldn't change them. But if you have such conviction in your beliefs that a game can't influence them, then you're just being obstinate. Right? You're being dogmatic. So I look at this game and I say, I see us do things that I'd like to see us continue to try to do. And if it is, look, can we all agree on this? If it is the case that standard were just really, really, really terrible, and we try this against Bournemouth, we might get ripped apart. We might. But we could still try it. We could play a 4-2-3-1 and press and push up and try to have, some territorial dominance. We could try it, and it could fail. And then we could look and we could say, well, go ahead, Tim.
It's earned the right to fail.
Yeah,
basically.
It's earned the right to be tried. That is exactly it, Tim. I loved this game and I loved the Forest game, and I'm not going to pretend that Forest is at the level of a Premier League team, although, they're not. How far can they possibly be? And I'm not going to pretend that Standard are at the level of a Premier League team, although they could be close. But I will certainly acknowledge that the way we played in those games has merit and should be something that we could at least consider in being able to influence and inform the way we play in Premier League games. And I would love to see that. Tim, I'll stay with you just for a last question as we wrap up here with you and Paul. When you look at the weekend and you look at the players that are playing well in the cup games and the way the league has gone, you referenced it earlier, but I just want to roll back to it for a second. The Granit Xhaka thing feels like the Jenga piece that has the whole thing, that keeps the whole thing from toppling over. Ceballos doesn't feel like he fits in the team with Xhaka, and Torreira doesn't get to play his natural role with Xhaka, and the mobility of the midfield to be able to push up and run back seems limited by Xhaka, and pinning it all on him is maybe exonerating Emery too much, or maybe putting too much responsibility on him. But to what extent do you feel that his inclusion, because let's face it, right? The best games we've had this season, Forest, Standard, the comeback against Villa, Frankfurt, Burnley, where we've looked coherent in midfield and where our attacking flow has been more enjoyable, he hasn't been in. Now, that's correlation. It doesn't necessarily mean causation, but it's certainly a relevant data point. So for you, is that the pin that has to be pulled, the domino that has to fall before maybe this starts to go in the right direction?
I'll just point out he did play against Frankfurt.
Yes, he did. Yes, and that's why. I didn't.
I think I reluctantly agree, because I generally really hate it. The kind of take this player out and all our problems are solved type thing. But And that's not to say it solves all of our problems.
It solves a lot of problems
honestly,
for other players in the sense that they may get to play the positions where they are more at home.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it, and that's why I don't want it to be like pejorative towards Xhaka and just say, "Oh, he's an idiot, he's a joker, get rid of him," and we don't have any idiots and jokers or flawed players in the team. It's you're right. It's a unit thing, and that's I as much as his flaws frustrate the hell out of me sometimes. I do feel sorry for Xhaka in that respect, but yes, I do kind of think that that's how it is at the moment. And again, to use that phrase again, that it's that solution has earned the right to fail. If we know what's going to happen if we keep playing Granit Xhaka there, we know because he's been there for nearly 3 years, so we know that, and
we know what our ceiling is with him playing that role.
Yes, exactly. And it could be that we play the next 3 Premier League games or whatever without him, and it might all go to shit as well. I don't see it like being quote unquote worse, but yeah, I'm perfectly prepared to believe that yes, maybe it just might not work for different reasons, but it's I think we've got to try it at this point. I really do. And Emery hasn't been adverse to trying pretty much everything else at this stage.
Can I make a point though? You know what,
yeah,
Tim?
yeah.
Like not to cut across you, but it's funny, right? People are really prepared to just throw out how we play against teams like Standard and Forest, and say it's level of competition stuff. It is kind of weird to me that arguably our best 30 minutes of Premier League football have come with 9 men, or pardon me, not 9 men, but 10 men in a game. And the only thing that was really different about that versus all of our other Premier League football is we just went hell for leather. And so if you're saying like just playing more attacking football can't work, what I would say is we did that against Villa with 10 men and it worked. Like, am I crazy to point to that and say, like, how is that not a relevant data point? I realize it's a weird game state, but we had 10 men on the pitch, we committed them all to attack, and it totally worked.
Yeah. I do think that's valid. I think a couple of caveats. Yes, the game state. Also, Villa are particularly bad in that situation. Villa, it's weird actually. Arsenal have won the most points, I think, in the Premier League from losing positions.
Maybe that tells you that when we have a losing position and we have to go out at an attack, we're good at it.
Yeah. But Villa have lost the most points.
Interesting.
From those positions. It's a real problem for them. And actually, I was delighted, but I was really surprised when they went 2-1 up against us that they completely stopped. Until it went to 2-2 again, and then they had like the odd kind of breakaway, and they really shouldn't have done that. Like they could have got a third. I'm
what I think is interesting?
Sure.
The more I watch football, the more I'm convinced that not many teams are any good at defending. Period. Like that when they have to defend, like teams just don't defend particularly well, and the teams that do it seem to do it by keeping the ball. And like if you said to me, well, Villa have lost the most points from leading positions, I'd say, well, that just tells me that they're really bad when they try to defend deep. And if you say that Arsenal have regained the most points from a losing position, what I'd say is they must be a hell of a team to try to stop when they're coming at you with an all-out attack. And like you put those two things together and you say, well, let's just go have a go at Villa. And when we did, it worked. So look, I realize that I am oversimplifying things, and I apologize for doing that. But I certainly think that it's not just that we did it against Standard and Forest. We had to do it against Villa, and it worked. And even if they are particularly wretched, to your point, like we know what happens if we don't do it. So maybe we should try. Paul, one thing that we haven't touched on, I think we should, and then Tim, I'm going to give you the finish with your favorite topic. So get ready for it. We haven't touched on Aubameyang and Guendouzi, and I don't think we need to make a mountain out of this molehill, but I am curious where you stand on the decision to bring them into this game. I think it's fair to call it totally unnecessarily.
Yeah, certainly. Like that's my knee jerk on it. It's like, why are we doing this? I could see you can come up with a scenario that, hey, Emery wanted to get Pepe firing and try Martinelli on the left as a 3, blah blah blah. I don't know that there's enough likely value in that. Tim's talked about and he's probably the better guy for this question. All the stuff we don't know in the backroom team, the medical team, the fitness team, etc. Is it better for players to be rested for the long-term outcome or to get to play? If he's suited up and he's on the bench and ready to go, is 12 minutes for Aubameyang better for him and his fitness long-term than not playing?
If we didn't have a game, presumably he'd have a full training. Right. So
yeah, and you can get interested or injured in training. We've managed to do that at Arsenal a number of times, and they might have a 45-minute game or a 60-minute game. I don't think Aubameyang is the player that Vojovic or whatever his name is going to go clattering into the back of. Wasn't surprised it was a Martinelli or a Ceballos where he was taking his frustrations out on him, but shit happens in the game. And tackles are more robust, and he's in the center of the box. So I'd love to get. It's one of those questions that, as a fan, you say that's ridiculous, but only a professional can tell you why, in God's name, they would do that. Maybe it's not the worst thing to do, but yeah, Guendouzi not so much. I guess. He's not the only midfielder we have, whereas Aubameyang is currently the only goal scorer we have.
From an age and options standpoint, there's a big difference between Guendouzi and Aubameyang.
But he does never get injured, pretty much. So, no. Given
that we have enough things that we seem to get angry and outraged and frustrated about at Arsenal at the moment, I am inclined to just say, fuck it. Nothing bad happened and move on. Like, we could have a whole pod just debating how you rotate and periodization, things like that. None of us are experts on it, so let's not pretend. I mean, Tim, unless you have a strong feeling about that, I want to finish with a quick one. Do you have a strong feeling about that?
No, I've tweeted about this enough today.
Okay. I'll go check that out.
He does have a strong feeling. He's expressed it.
Oh, and was it that it was dumb to use him?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay, well then good. We can all stay upbeat. So the last thing is this. I am at the point now where I think it is in everybody's best interest from a sanity standpoint to just not discuss Mesut Ozil again this season. To accept that whether it is 80% Emery's fault or 80% Mesut's fault or 50-50 or 90-10 or whatever it is, that the player and the manager have fallen out, that the player is not in his plans, that he was named captain for reasons that we will never know, that he will probably play somewhat, unless there is a huge sea change in their relationship or a managerial change, that he probably will not be a regular feature in the team, and that discussing it can only serve to sow disharmony and frustration. Should this be the last time we just bother discussing Mesut Ozil unless he's on the pitch and we're talking about his performance?
Look,
I mean, possibly. So the thing is, actually, I wrote about this earlier this week about how I was kind of confused about what Emery's treatment of him was for, and not because I think like Ozil shouldn't be left out or anything like that. I just wasn't clear on the mixed messages, like the kind of so this, for example, I completely get this. Like Emery made this clear. He hasn't been in the 18 for the last 2 games, and he was asked about it, and he said other players deserve it more. He has to work hard to get back in. So there's a reason there. Okay, so what he's basically saying is he hasn't put it in on the training ground. I have complete sympathy for that. I completely defer to Emery's better knowledge base on that, and if that's the case, that is absolutely what should happen. If players aren't training properly, they shouldn't play, no matter who they are. So I have complete sympathy with that. And actually,
and Tim, if it's a lie, that's something he knows the Ozil camp would put some PR about. So it's obviously there's obviously some weight to what he's saying. Yeah,
and because what I didn't get was playing him against Forest as captain, and he plays well, and then hauling him off, in a very pointed way to kind of humiliate it. Like, I don't get that. I don't get the need to make those like humiliating, like those to slightly defile the player in public, but just leaving him out. Yeah, I completely get, like, that's a clear decision that has been taken. That's easy to follow. That's easy to follow for the player. The message is there for the player. work harder. You're not working hard enough. You're not in. Fine. That is absolutely fine. But for me, what I didn't get was the kind of the half in, half out. You're not playing today, but you're going to play today and be captain. You're going to play today and be captain. I'm going to take you off after 70 minutes, even though you're playing well. Then I'm going to leave you out of the 18. It's that kind of rousing, sleeping dog stuff that I didn't get. And
the fact that it's so inconsistent, Tim, in terms of the behaviour, especially recently. I mean, he had a good pre-season, then you know it looks like he's in the plans, then he has the incident, then he's kind of back with Forest and Watford and does fairly well, and now this stuff's going on. And in the middle he was made a captain. Makes me think stuff is going on right now or in the last week or two. Events have changed. People have said things. Meetings have happened. Incidences have happened.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Ozil gave him a mouthful after the Nottingham Forest game, and that might be behind it. But I think, personally, I feel a bit more comfortable with this now because it looks like, because we're never going to be told that stuff, really. It's unlikely we're going to be told that Mesut Ozil, had a go at Emery or didn't or whatever. But the thread that we've got to follow now is that if you train well, you will be in the team or the squad. If you don't train well and you don't put it in, you won't be. So even if he's back in the squad on Sunday, personally, I will take that as, well, he trained well. And, he did what he was asked to do and what he was supposed to do. And then, so even if it is a little bit in out, I feel like I can follow it. I can't play him and then haul him off even though he's playing well. Like, I can't follow that. But this, I feel like makes more sense. And therefore, I feel a bit more at peace with it for whatever that's worth.
And let's be clear about something. Fair or unfair, when you take a job at a big club, and I'd like to think we are still one of those, this is something you've got to be good at. If you're the Madrid manager, you've got to handle Gareth Bale or Cristiano Ronaldo. And if you're the United manager, you got to handle Paul Pogba. And if you're the Chelsea manager, you don't have any good players, so it's not a big deal at all. If you are I'm kidding. If you're Pochettino, you've got the Eriksen situation, and Vertonghen situation. If you're, you can go through all of these. If you're City, you've got the Sane situation, right? We have the Ozil situation. This is not unique to Arsenal. This happens at big clubs. These are big egos. They have entourages around them. There's crazy shit that goes on, and you've got to be able to handle these situations at a big club. It's not enough to just be good with the tactics board. You've got to be able to man manage nearly impossible situations. The Neymar situation at PSG comes to mind. We could get into Emery's history of doing it. I don't think we need to right now. It's just not worth it. But it is certainly a situation.
So interestingly, with the examples you talked about, they kind of haven't been handled by anybody.
No, they haven't. No, they're problems. But I mean, again, I think you would say that the best.
Can I make one other point on the PSG
Alex Ferguson handled the Roy Keane situation. You could say that Arsene Wenger handled a few in his time as well. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, Ferguson was a despot, so that made it easy for him. But with absolute power. The thing about PSG is there's a narrative that we know he can't handle big names from what happened to PSG, which is fine. I won't even get into that half of the debate. But the other thing we saw that we ignore is he was a company man at PSG. He did exactly what the owners asked him to do with the personnel. Now, not everybody loved him for it or respected him, but he did exactly what he was asked to do by the owners in terms of who he played and who he didn't, and to some degree how he set up his team. People think he came back from PSG and now he's 180 degrees reacting to Ozil. No, he hasn't changed at all, would be my guess. He may not have handled the Ozil situation. They may not have hit it off. He may have been able to get more out of that relationship. But I think overall, he's pretty much in lockstep with what the club have asked him to do with Ozil along the way. So people think it's just personal animus. I don't think it's that. I think it's a difficult situation that a lot of managers would have struggled with. We all would have said Ozil was going to be the challenge to integrate for Emery because of his style and because Ozil was the star, and in particular because Emery is looking for buy-in from players and Mr. Ozil is Mr. Too Cool for School. I love the guy, right? I know I've been taking Emery's side a bit recently on this without many facts. but I love the guy, but he was always the guy that Emery was going to run up against when drawing a line as to what's acceptable and what's not from.
There's a lot of different ways to handle it. I mean, United can't win without Pogba. They can't. I don't think Spurs can win without Eriksen. I don't think, you go through these teams. I mean, City can win without Sané. So he's frozen out. That's it. I think, unfortunately, as a manager, I'm not saying this is fair, but if you freeze out a player because that's how you're handling a tough situation and the results aren't working out, you will lose your job before the player will. I'm not saying it's right, but you got to be careful. If Ole Gunnar Solskjaer doesn't play Pogba and United's results dip, not that they can dip any lower than they have, Ole's going to lose his job. Pogba's going to be fine, right? So it's a big thing. And you know me, I'm not afraid to be wrong, and wrong quite vehemently. I don't love to put myself out there when I don't have information. None of us have enough information on the Ozil situation to make uniform blanket statements about what's happening. We just don't.
Amen.
We have guesswork. We have bias. If you're a little more pro Ozil and a little more anti Emery, or vice versa, you have a bias you bring to the debate. You're not at training. You don't know the truth. There are rumors. They may be true. They may be false. At the end of the day, if anyone wants to tell you definitively that they know what's right here, they're wrong. The only definitive thing we know is if Arsenal can't win football games and Mesut Ozil could help us win football games, that's going to cost Emery his job. So he's got to get it right. And I feel for him. I hope he does. Paul's on Twitter at Pause in My Pants. Thanks, Pause.
Woohoo!
Clive's not here. Woohoo! Kidding. Tim's on Twitter at Stoberto. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, and I'd just like to say that I don't bring any bias to the Emery Ozil situation because I want them both to go.
Touche. Spitting fire at the hour and a half mark from Tim. 90 minutes in, and the hot takes come out. By the way, Tim.
Yeah.
This is me giving you a virtual handshake, fist bump, whatever the kids do these days. My name's Elliot, Mythical Black Man, Twitter, Yankee Gunner. Scott, obviously, you know him. We talked about him. Over on Patreon, Scott's match sims are going to be up momentarily. We're going to be doing a couple different Patreon pods that we have lined up for the international break. We'll have a post-match pod after Bournemouth. You, of course, can read the brilliant writing on theathletic.com/Arsenal Vision to sign up and get a month free and 50% off. That's like more than 49%. Think about that when you put it that way. Crazy. Or sign up for our Patreon. To be fair, they're both wonderful. But you do what you want to do. So look, at least enjoy the games when they're good. Football only gives you so many games, and so many of them are going to be good. This was great. This was a ton of fun, and I had a blast watching it, and I hope there's more like it. And you know how I think Emery can turn things around real easily? More games like this, please, starting with Bournemouth. We'll talk to you after Arsenal 10, Bournemouth 0.